Okay. I just want to make a short video going into the basics of space, right? So, what space is, what, it means to contest space or control space, taking space, giving space, right? And how to identify when you need to give space, when you can take space, being able to identify what space you should be trying to contest and control, right? And then how that affects the ebb and flow of an engagement, the positioning of the teams involved, and who has the advantage in the engagement, right? So we're going to go over some definitions, and then we'll jump into an example, which is a game that I played with a couple other members of the server. But let's define space first, okay? In hero shooters, when people use the term space, they're typically talking about one of two things, right? There's two types of space. The first is physical space, and the second is mental space. So physical space is really simple. It is the physical space occupied by a hero. This Thor is controlling this physical space. They're not pushing through this Thor for the most part, unless they're diving, all right? A Doctor Strange standing where he is, holding up a shield, physically controlling that space, right? He's physically occupying the space. The second type of space is a little bit more nuanced. It's mental space. So where a Strange physically controls space, something like a Venom creates space not by, standing there, but by forcing the enemy team to respond to him, right? He dives into their backline, he becomes a source of disruption, of danger. They have to divert their attention away from the rest of his team onto him, right? And that enables the rest of your team to contest space, to go for a pick, whatever it is, in the same way that physically controlling a space enables your team to do those things, right? For now, we're just going to focus on the first type. We're just going to focus on physical space occupation, right? Because it's the simplest and it's the easiest to get into. So, the next thing that we need to define is what it means to give space or take space, right? Giving space is just retreating, right? When somebody says we need to give space, it means back up, right? And if you're giving space, it's usually because the enemy team got a pick on you and you are now at a numbers disadvantage. You're down a tank, you're down a healer, you're down, it's now a 4v6 or a 3v5 or whatever it is. You are at a significant disadvantage in terms of your capacity to contest the enemy team, and you need to back up to a safer position, right? Vice versa, taking space means that you are in an advantage. You can push into the enemy team. Your DPS got a pick on a healer, right? The tanks are low because of that, right? And you can physically force yourself, like the team can physically, like fully engage with the enemy team, and you will consistently win those engagements. You'll build a lot of ult charge. You'll send the enemy team back to the respawn screen, right? That's taking space. So let's get into the example here. This is Shin Shibuya. We are on defense. We're going to take a look at where the two teams set up, where they're positioning. We're going to talk about tank equilibrium, so where the teams are actually like kind of clashing, right? Where they're making contact with each other. And we're going to look at where that forces or enables the teams to position, the effect it has on who has an advantage, and then we're going to go through a hypothetical of what might have happened in terms of positioning if we had had slightly different space that we were trying to control. So at the start of this, there's just kind of some poking going on. Here we go. So this is contact, right? This is where the two teams are setting up. So the enemy team, we'll look at them first, is setting up on this corner, right? They're going to play this corner, looking into our team. The tank equilibrium, the place where the tanks are, kind of in each other's faces, physically jostling for position. We can draw it right here. It's a line between, their front line and our front line. So let's take a look at where both sides are positioning or are having to position as a result of where the tanks, the front lines, are clashing into each other, right? Our team, in order to keep our tanks alive, our supports have to position in this big, wide open lane. They're far away from cover. They're exposed. I'm obviously positioning here, but you're going to see I'm going to drop down. I'm going to push up because in order to apply pressure, I'm also going to have to position in this lane. All right. And our tanks are exposed to pressure, not only from the enemy tanks, but from the enemy supports and the enemy DPS, because they have a direct line of sight onto us. In contrast, the enemy tanks are positioning around this corner and this corner, where their healers are being enabled to position as a result is not in an open lane with a line of sight onto a DPS, right? It's not a corner that our backline can peek and play around to try and get a pick. They get to position all the way back here in this lane and pump healing into their team, into their supports, into their tanks. These tanks, these DPS are never dying, right? Sometimes if you have a very competent dive DPS, we didn't in this case, but if you have a very competent Spider-Man, they can mitigate this to some degree, right, by getting a pick. But for the most part, in most cases, these supports are never dying, ever, right? Which means that these tanks are never dying, which means that they have free reign to apply pressure into our team, into our tanks, into our supports. They can contest this space, they can push forward, they can play this corner, and they can pump damage and pressure into our entire team, into our supports, into our DPS, and our tanks as well, right? Okay. So we've seen pretty clearly that this position right here, positioning here, has enabled the enemy team to position in an incredibly advantageous position, right? Their supports are in a very, very safe position with multiple pieces of hard cover between them and our DPS. And our team, in contrast, is far from cover in an exposed open lane where it is very easy for the enemy team to play for a pick, to apply pressure to our backline, and to effectively push into us and force us to give space, right? Let's go back a little bit. Let's do a hypothetical. Let's say instead of the line of equilibrium being on this corner, right, being right here, instead of trying to contest this front part of the choke point, we were trying to contest the back part of it, right? Instead of contesting where the Captain America is right now, we're trying to contest where the Mantis is. That's where our tanks are positioning, right? Now they're positioning on this corner instead of up there. It's like 10 feet, 15 feet, right? But look at the difference that it makes. By positioning here, not only do they have immediate access to hard cover behind this corner, not only do they have immediate access by backing up to hard cover behind this corner, but it enables our supports, instead of to position in this lane, to position all the way back here in the back of this point, with multiple lines and multiple sources of hard cover between them and the enemy DPS and the enemy tanks, right? This is a very, very safe position for our supports to be in. And when our tanks are taking damage, they're getting pressured, they need to, you know, back up to get healing, they've got to give space. Well, you know, they're playing this corner. They're contesting where the Mantis is. They back up a little bit. They're still contesting this space. They're still contesting this lane, but they have line of sight of the supports without the supports being exposed. Or they back up like this. They're still contesting this space. They're still able to apply pressure into people that are pushing up, but they have line of sight to the supports. Furthermore, it doesn't just enable your supports to position far safer. It doesn't just make the tanks positioning safer because they have close access to, cover. Their supports aren't being pressured. It also enables your DPS to take more advantageous positions. Your DPS can play where I am right now. I don't have to drop down and push up into this open lane. I get to play this high ground, right, to apply pressure into that area that's being contested. I get to position around hard cover. I get to take an advantageous position as a DPS. So 15 feet completely changes from, you know, your whole team being forced into a disadvantageous position and being exposed to danger. Now your team is in a very advantageous position, and is far removed from danger. Okay. Well, what does this positioning do to the enemy team? All right. Well, if this line of, like being, this equilibrium, this tank equilibrium line this imaginary line we're drawing between the tanks is happening where the Magneto and the Mantis are, instead of up here. In order to keep their tanks alive, because they're being pressured by DPS, by the tanks, whatever it is, right? In order to keep their tanks alive, their supports don't get to position back here behind multiple lanes of, lines of cover. They don't have vision, a line of sight onto that, you can see the silhouette of the Magneto and the Mantis there. They don't have a way to support, like, keep their tanks alive. They have to play here. They have to play in this big open lane where our supports are right now, right? Means they are exposed to danger. They are exposed to pressure from the enemy tanks, our tanks, from our DPS. They're in a dangerous position. It's the same for their DPS players. In order to apply pressure, they don't get to play around pieces of cover, kind of poking into exposed, vulnerable targets. They have to play in a dangerous position, poking into people who have an advantageous position, right? In order for their DPS to apply pressure to our supports, instead of being able to play this corner, they now have to somehow push all the way up into here, up through here, which puts them way out of position, makes them super, super vulnerable to getting picked. And once you've got a pick on a DPS, on a support, whatever it is, then you can push forward into them, you can contest the space, you can engage the team as a whole, wipe them, kill 2, 3, 4, whatever it is, force a full retreat, and reset, right? So 15 feet is all it takes between forcing your team to position in a very, very vulnerable, dangerous spot, right? And allowing the enemy team to position in a very advantageous, safe spot, versus allowing your team to position in a very safe, advantageous position and forcing the enemy team to position in a very dangerous, disadvantageous position. These tiny little differences, right? It's 15 feet, but it completely flips who has the advantage and disadvantage in the engagement. And understanding these fundamentals, being able to identify situations like this in your games, is going to make more of a difference for ranking up than anything else. As a tank player, if you're playing tank, take a moment, maybe in game, maybe after a game, to look at your positioning, look at where you are, and think to yourself, okay, where am I? Where is it, like, my positioning for me, but also where is my team being forced or enabled to position relative to me, right? Because as a tank, you're the most important person on the team. Everybody else, you are the sun, we orbit around you. We position around you, right? So think to yourself, where is my positioning? Like, what is my positioning doing to where my team is positioning, right? And even as a support and DPS player, it is a useful tool to be able to identify where, think to yourself, okay, where am I positioning? Where am I having to position in order to apply pressure, in order to keep my tanks alive? And, is this a safe position? Could I be, if it's not a safe position, is there a way that we could still defend this objective, right? Because if you're holding this corner, you're still defending the objective. The objective is not this garage door. The objective is not this choke point. The objective is the capture point, right? You're still defending that objective. You're still stopping them from getting to that objective, but your team is in an advantageous position. Is there a position, if we are in a dangerous position, if we are in an exposed position, is there a different position that we could be occupying? Is there a different space that we could be contesting or controlling that would keep us safer and still defend the objective, right? Or keep us safer but still apply pressure to the objective if you're on the attack, right? Being able to identify those things is really useful. It's really important. Okay, I think that's probably enough for now. This is a super deep, super complex topic. I'm happy to go more in detail on it if people need or if they want. I'm happy to do some replay analysis. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask. But as far as understanding the basics and getting an example of how just literally 15 feet completely flips who is going to win a fight, right? And who is positioned in a safe place versus a dangerous place, being able to identify those, taking the time to practice identifying those is going to make more of a difference than anything else, and it's something that you need to learn if you want to climb into the higher elos.